In this video, we're going to go over how to sew our button onto our Chromebook case. I've already marked where I want my button. That's right there, and that's where it lines up with my button tab. And then I'm going to go ahead and sew my button on. So for this step, you're going to need your button, you're going to need a hand sewing needle, you're going to need some thread, and some scissors. Okay, I'm going to take some thread, and I'm going to cut about an arm's length. You won't be able to see what I'm doing, but an arm's length, or usually about like 2 or 3 feet is about a good length. So I'm going to cut that right here. I just measured the length of my arm, but it kind of about 2 or 3 feet. So you can kind of see the length from here to here. That's my thread. And I'm going to thread that through my needle. The reason I'm doing an arm's length is because if I do much more than that, I tend to get it tangled up, and then I have to cut it off, and it's a whole mess. So I'm just going to do one arm's length, and I will go ahead and thread my needle. There we go. So I'm just going to thread it through the eye of the needle. You can see that there's a little opening up there, and that's where I'm threading it. And then I'm going to take my 2 ends, line them up together on my thread. So here's one end, here's another end. I'll make sure they aren't twisted. And then I'll take my 2 ends and I'm going to tie a knot. There's a couple ways to tie a knot. One way would be to just make a loop and then pull it through the loop. After I do that one time, I would want to do it again and have my loop that second knot on top of this one. So that can be a little bit tricky trying to get the second knot lined up. Another way to tie a knot is if you take your 2 fingers and you pinch your tails, so index finger and thumb, and then I wrap around my index finger. I'm going to roll my thumb to the right and my index finger to the left, and it will kind of make everything curl up. And once I'm at the very tip of my index finger, I'll take my middle finger and I'm going to put it on top of all of this tangled mess and push together with my index finger, my thumb, and pull. And that tends to make another knot that's a little bit messier, but a little bit faster and easier for some people, harder for other people. So pick the one that works for you, but that kind of made a second knot on top of my original knot for me. So I'm going to go ahead and use that. Again, you can just do another loop if you would like to do the loop version. You just do a loop and then you pull it through. And then I just pull this tight. So now you can see I have a few knots here, and I'm just going to trim it so that I have my biggest knot right there. And there's not a lot of extra. Now that I have that trimmed, I'm ready to go on sewing my button. And I'm going to come right here where my button is going to go. And I will start by just taking my needle, and it's going to go through that point. But I want to make sure that I'm going through the right layers. So I have my bag here. There's the front of the bag and the back of the bag. And I want to be going through all the layers of the front of the bag, which is still 3 layers of fabric. Remember, there's felt, there's outside fabric, and there's inside fabric. But you can see I'm going through all of those layers right there. You can hopefully see that. And I'll just pull through like that, so that I have a knot, and I'll zoom in so you can see my knot right there. So there's my little knot on the top of my blue dot, and then I'm going to go back up through right where I am. So I'm going to just right next to that same spot, I'll go back up through, so I come out right next to my knot, and then I'm ready to start sewing on my button. In my case, I have a button that has 4 holes. You might have 2 holes, which will be a little bit different. You would just go in and out of the same holes over and over in a loop. And since I have 4, I'm going to be doing an X on one side and an equal sign on the other. So I will go through one right here. So I'm just pick a random piece, a random hole to go through. And then I'm going to be doing my X on the front, equal sign on the back. So to do an X, I would go diagonal from it. I'm going to go diagonal, and then I'll just kind of be careful about where I'm going through, still kind of diagonal from where I was to begin with. And I'll watch on the back where I'm coming through so it's not super messy. I'll come through, and for an equal sign, then I just need to go parallel, like straight over from where I am, and I'll come up right there. So I'm going to pull through those threads. See how those threads are kind of tangled? All I need to do to fix those is just pull my other threads that didn't come through all the way. There we go. So now I can come up through, and I am ready to do the other part of my X. So I already have one diagonal line. I'm going to do the other diagonal line to create my X. And as I do that, I'm going to watch the back again. I know it's a little bit crazy on my back, but I'm going to watch it, and I can even move a little bit where my needle's coming through so that I'm ready to do an equal sign on the back. So I'll just go parallel to the other line I created. So you can see that line here, and I'm going to do a parallel line up top. And I'm going to make sure that I'm coming out of the top or the bottom right in your case buttonhole. And then I'll just keep doing the X, and I'm going to do this maybe 4 or 5 times. So I'm just going to do this pretty fast here. If you need a refresher, you can go back to the first few steps and just kind of watch them again. But I'm just going to do this a few times to get my button, and I want to straighten this out a little bit where I want it. So I'm doing an equal sign on the back again, plus sign on, or cross on the front, and you can see some of my threads can get pulled here. So I'm just going to pull them nice and tight, and I'll keep doing my X and equal sign, and I'm always just checking on the back before I even pull through to make sure it's going to be neat. And there we go. Sorry if I go out of frame a little bit. So after I've gone through about 4 or 5 times and I feel like my button is pretty secure, I can give it a good tug and kind of feel, okay, my button's on there. I'm going to do what's called a shank. So to do a shank, I'm going to come from the back here. And I'm going to zoom out just a little bit so I make sure I'm not out of frame ever. I'm going to come from the back, and I will go through my fabric but not through my needle. So here's my fabric, and I'm going to come up through the fabric but between the fabric and the needle. So here's my between the fabric and the button. I kept saying needle, but I meant button. Here's my button. My needle is coming between my fabric and my button, and I'm going to pull it through like that. I'll make sure my button looks nice on both sides before I'm moving on, and then I'm going to do what's called the shank. For the shank, I'm going to wrap my thread around these little threads in here. So what I'm doing is I'm trying to protect these threads and raise my button up at the same time. And we'll see how that works. But I take this, I'm going to wrap it around 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times. Okay, you can kind of see it's wrapped around there. I'm going to pull it nice and tight. So I'm pulling on that. And what that does is it protects my threads. So it makes my button a little bit stronger. Gives them a little bit of a coating, and it also raises my button up just a little bit so that my buttonhole has somewhere to go. So my buttonhole can go between my button and my bag. So I'm going to pull that nice and tight, and then I'm ready to tie it off. And to tie it off, I'm going to go in between, again, the button and my fabric, and I'll take just a little bite of fabric as close as I can to where my thread is. So I'll just take like a little tiny bite, just a couple threads is all I need there. You can see I'm just taking a little tiny bite, and I will make a loop. So here's my loop. My needle is going to go through that loop right there, and I'll pull it tight. And then I'm going to do it one more time, just grabbing an even smaller piece of thread. And I'm going to go through my loop again, just like that, and that creates my knot. Now, instead of just cutting my thread right there, what I'm going to do to strengthen my buttonhole, because if I cut my thread right there, then that knot becomes really weak. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take my needle, and I'm going to go between 2 layers of fabric. So right now I'm just underneath the inside fabric. I'm not coming through the outside fabric, sorry. I'm not coming through my inside fabric. So I'm just kind of in the middle, in the nowhere's land between. And I'll go over about 1 inch and then come back through the outside fabric. And again, you don't see anything on the inside fabric from this. I'm just through the outside fabric, not even through the felt. And I'll pull that. That gives I'm going to trim it off right there. So it goes and it's hiding inside of my bag. You can't see it on either side. But that tail gives my knot a little bit more strength because it's not just like a tiny knot and then loose threads. It's a tiny knot and 1 inch of thread, but the inch of thread is invisible. Once you do this, you are finished with your Chromebook case. Congratulations. You can go ahead and test it out. I'm going to take my buttonhole or my button and put it over my button. So the buttonhole over the button. And mine probably needs to be cut out just a little bit more so that it fits. So if yours doesn't fit, you can just do a little trim, just gentle. You don't want to cut through that top bar, but that should make it fit a lot better. There we go. And now I have a working buttonhole and button, and my Chromebook case is completed. Nice job.